Okay. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, good
It's not
evening.
displaying.
Oh no. Okay. So I've not started presenting yet. So we are basically getting to the interesting part of what we've been doing so far. You notice so far we've been doing add days, subtract days, and all that and all that. And when I proposed this particular training, what I said was that we're going to be building stuff and we're going to be thinking in the area of actually building things and not just coding, writing A is equal to 2, B is equal to 5 and doing A plus B. So that's why normally I could have given you more programming related questions like things like Fibonacci sequence, sort order and the likes. But at the end of the day, most of the time you will not really need to use them in actual real life work. That's why I gave that particular example because it's something that most of us can actually relate to rather. So basically today we are going to start by solving that particular question. Let's see my own approach. My approach, like something about coding, is that my approach is not the correct approach. There is no correct approach. What you did is not wrong. What I'll do is not wrong. So long as I get my output in an efficient way, then I did it very well. So I'm going to be sharing my screen in the next seconds. Share entire screen. Okay. Okay. Please confirm you can see my screen by typing yes in the search bar. Please confirm you can see my screen by typing yes. Can you see it now? Please confirm. It's actually displaying now. It is actually displaying now. Okay. Oh, okay, wonderful. So we can all see my screen right now. So let's get to it then. So the question I gave, this is actually the question I gave. I don't know. This looks like what I gave as a question. I said question one is just one question basically. I don't know why I put one. I don't know why I put one in the question. So question one says write a program that takes 6 input variables from a user using the input function. That means we don't want it to be static. We want it to be kind of dynamic. Now, user's first name, user's last name, user's basic salary, user's transport allowance, user's housing allowance, and user's other allowances rather. Now, this program should calculate the gross pay and compare it to another input value of your choice. Any amount would do. To tell is the gross pay value to tell if the gross pay value is higher, that's upper class, or lower class, and the output should be in the form name should be name is first name last name, basic salary should be basic salary whatever input that the user has put, then transport allowance should be transport allowance whatever input that the person has brought in, then housing allowance, then other allowance. You should tell the user that you are in the upper or lower salary category based on if condition. That means you should compare the person's gross pay. So let's just add a little something here. I think I added that towards the end. Let's say this is gross pay. Gross pay. Okay. Okay. Now I said gross. Okay, sorry about that. All right. So you are in the upper or lower salary category based on the if condition. That's based on if condition. Note, all variables should be dynamic and not static. Now, gross pay is equal to basic salary plus transport allowance plus housing allowance plus other allowance. I'm sure those of us that are either leaders or managers in our organization must have seen situations like this where we need to calculate the gross pay of our staff or maybe we need to, or maybe personally, when we are sent our payroll at the end of the month, we'll see things like basic salary and the likes, and we need to calculate our gross pay. So this is just a simple Python program that does the calculation of that for just one staff. For just one staff. Eventually, we are going to make it very complicated. Yes, it's going to get very complicated. I use the word complicated because we are going to add a whole chunk of features. I'm currently working on one, a bit complicated, but we'll build things around these simple things that we are building. So first and foremost, we need to open Anaconda as usual. Now I've already opened that. So this is where I am on Anaconda. That's this my Anaconda. Currently I am in downloads. So let me go back to my folder. Let's say I start off something in my desktop. Jupyter. Okay, let me just create a new Python 3 notebook, just to so that we can just have something to work with. Okay. Okay. So the title should be gross pay calculator. It's going to be saved as an IPyNB. Right? Remember I mentioned to you that the only solution, the only software that can actually open that notebook file is Anaconda itself. Which implies that you cannot open this particular file with your Visual Studio or your Sublime Text or your Atom. There are so many IDEs. This particular file can only be opened with Anaconda distribution. So let's get to it. Now I've opened a Python gross pay calculator and I've set up my file. So basically, what do I need? That's the first question. Now the program said that I'm going to get 6 inputs. So I first need to state those 6 inputs. We're going to make it very basic. The first input is called first name. Let's say first underscore name equals. Now, first name, is it a string or an integer? That's another question. Now, if it is a string, we don't need to change what the input is giving us, because I mentioned earlier that when you use the input function, it gives you string. So first name naturally will be a string. So you don't need to make it a string anymore since it's already a string. So what you simply say is input, enter your first. Now I'm making it very, very basic because most of the actual Python code that we use for printing, and when we start doing real life applications, we may not necessarily need them, except maybe when we get to data science and we need to start using things like Matplotlib and all that. So enter your first name. Now it is going to give us, we need the person's first name. So let's simply copy this. Let's copy it. Let's copy it into 6 places so that we can manipulate it. Okay, this is 7. Okay, so now the next thing that I asked is, I said the input values I need are user's first name, user's last name, user's basic salary, user's transport allowance, user's housing allowance, and others. So let's simply name this last name. Then let's call this basic salary. Let's call this transport allowance. You see how I'm separating each variable with an underscore. I'm separating each variable with an underscore. Then transport allowance, then we have housing allowance. Then we have the final one, which is other allowances. Now let's go back here. Now, first name is a string. Last name is a string, like I mentioned earlier. Then basic salary itself. Is basic salary a string, an int, or a float? Who can answer that question? What do you think it will be? What kind of data do you think basic salary will be? Would it be an integer or a float or a string? Thank you. It's a float. Very clear. Basic salary is going to be is going to be a float. So we need to wrap our input in float. Can you see what I just did? I simply made it so this one will just simply change the text here to enter your last name. This one is enter your basic salary. Then this one is enter your, let's call this transport allowance. Then let's call this enter your housing allowance. Then let's call this enter your other allowances. Okay, now please look at what I'm doing here. You will notice here that basic salary, we have agreed that basic salary is a float. Then we have agreed that transport allowance is also that means transport allowance should also be a float, because you can have decimals there depending on the calculation of whoever is paying it. So let's wrap that in float. Now you will notice here that also that I am very careful in choosing between integer and float. For example, if I want to type in somebody's name, for example, I am not going to use float because a person's name cannot be a decimal. A person's name cannot be a decimal. So what I'm going to type in that particular instance is I'm going to use an integer. For example, if I'm going to type a person's weight will be a float, because you can have 4.5 kg, you can have decimals. So you need to look, you need to identify the kind of variable that you are going to get, then determine what exactly you are going to assign that variable as, especially when you are taking from input function. If it is not from input function, for input function it gives us string, we have to convert. So then we have to state the particular data type that we need. But if it is not an input function, the data type is automatically detected by Python. Python will automatically look at that data and say this data is integer or a float or a string or a list or whatever it is. Hope I'm making sense so far. Please confirm that I'm making sense. Okay, somebody just asked, can you please explain why basic salary is a float and not an integer? Very good question. Now, like what I just mentioned, for example, a person that is being paid in an organization, a person can be paid 900,000.50 kobo. $900,050. Now, if the number that you entered is an integer, if you say the number is an integer, that means you are telling the system that it is an integer, that it doesn't have decimal places. It does. Now try the person. Somebody just said instead of float, I used integer from basic salary. Let's try something so that it can get clear for everybody to see. Okay, now let's look at this. Let's just say print. Okay, not this. This one doesn't have any issue. Let's go to basic salary. Let's say it should print basic salary. So let's comment all this out so that it doesn't give us, we don't get to. Okay, now you see here I have used float. Now let's assume I used integer here. Let's say int, and let's say shift enter your basic salary. Let's say I say 234.56. Did you see what he gave me? Hope the person that is asking that question, hope you understand what I'm doing here. Now you notice here that I declared basic salary as an int function. Now what I gave as an input is invalid literal for int is what? They said 234.56. 234.56 is not a float, it is an int. Sorry, it's not an int, it is a float. But I'm telling Python that when you take this variable, assign it as an integer. That is an error in itself. It has detected that this is an error. This is not an integer, it is a float. So wrap your input in what is the value that you are expecting is. Now let me tell you a catch. Now using float in your program would take both int and float. Let me show you what I mean. Let's go back here. Let's say I come down here and say, let's change this to a float. Let's change this to a float, and let's rerun it. Let's say we now put 50. Have you seen that? You will see that float, by assigning that variable to a float, has changed the integer to a float by adding a 0.0 to it. By adding a 0.0 to it, which means that it is saying it is 50.0. Hope I'm making sense so far. Okay, wonderful. It won't work for decimals. Okay, now very good. That's why it is very important that whenever you are declaring a variable, understand the kind of variable that you are importing. Because because we work on more like a payroll system using Python and HTML, but I want you to understand that when we are taking values, we need to understand the kind of values that we are taking, so that whenever we take those values into our program, sometimes we may take values from Excel sheets, we may take values from HTML templates, we may take values from a database. We need to understand the kind of values that we are taking. It is critical. Because if we do not understand the kind of values that we are taking, it means that we will be taking wrong value, and our code will just have a lot of bugs. We'll discover that it's not running. We'll keep asking questions. Why is it not running? Now let's uncomment all this. Now, by the way, what I did to comment out my code, I explained what comment is, if I'm correct. I told you comment, whatever you comment in your code does not run as part of the code. So to comment out a particular section, just highlight that section and type control backslash. Control backslash will comment everything out that you have highlighted. So let's move on. Let's remove this print statement here. Now, we need all this to be in float. Now, remember that when I mentioned, I also told you that the program should calculate the gross pay, fine. Compare it to another input value of your choice, yes. Any amount will do. Now, another input value of your choice. So let's simply tell the system that, okay, we need another value. Let's say, let's call it comparison. I can call it anything I want. Let's just call it comparison, but we'll stick to a particular naming convention when we get to actual real life work, so that our code will be readable. Then we'll still use the same float. It's going to be a float. We'll compare it to another float. Enter your comparison value. Are you seeing that? Okay, so now that is done, we are going to we now want to tell the computer that the program that we are supposed to write tells us that, okay, write a program that calculates the gross pay. Now, I told us earlier that gross pay is first basic plus transport plus housing plus others. Now, there's a small trick in Python called the sum. We can say, I don't know if it worked that without me importing anything. So let's say gross pay equals sum of. I've introduced you to a new function in Python now, which is called sum. Instead of doing plus, instead of using plus, we are going to simply use sum. Now, what this does is it adds up everything inside this bracket. I use it a lot in real life work. Okay, so you can see I've said gross pay is equal to sum of basic salary, transport allowance, housing allowance, other allowance. Instead of saying gross pay is equal to basic allowance plus transport allowance plus housing allowance plus other allowance, and put a plus sign in between, all I just need is put everything inside a bracket and put the function sum. We'll still use others. We'll use max, we'll use min. There are so many of them. So let's move on. Now, we've gotten our gross pay. Now, the program is telling us that we should compare our gross pay to the comparison value. We will now simply say this. We will now say, if, remember the if function, if gross pay is we are looking at greater than or less than. If gross pay is less than comparison, that's the name of the variable. Like I told you, variable naming, you can use any naming of your choice. so long as you understand exactly where you used it and why you use it. If gross pay is less than comparison, we simply do this. We want it to print. Let's go back to our what did we say we should do? We should print the first name. It should print the name. So what we are going to do is this. We'll simply go back to our program and say print. Sorry, I always make that mistake. Print. Now let me introduce you to an interesting Python print function. You just put F, then put colon, quotation marks, and simply say name. Remember what we want is name. We simply put 2 curly braces. Then we say space. We simply put another 2 curly braces. Then we now come down here and say, we now put, is it the brackets? Let's use the normal one. I can't. Okay, let's use print. Like I told you before, I print functions. Hold on. I've forgotten how to use that print function. I hardly ever use it. So hold on, please. Let's see the structure properly. Now I'm trying to make you understand. I am not perfect in what do they call it? In coding. Sorry. Print F. Okay, Python. F string. Okay, so let's quickly move on. All right, let's move back there. Okay, so see what I'm talking about. So we can still use it. F. The name is, let's say the name is first name. That's what we agreed to use. First underscore name. I'll explain this to you, please. Then we say last underscore name. Then close this out. Okay. Now, what does this do? Now, this simply prints, this tells the system that, okay, I have a bracket here. I'm going to print all this together. What I want is the name. The name is first name. I want you to take this first name variable and throw it inside this curly brace. That's throw it inside this particular sentence. Then also take the last name and also throw that inside this sentence. So what it will print out, let's try it out. Okay, we cannot try it out yet. It will be a bit complicated. So let's also print what did they say we should print? Print basic salary is basic salary, the same thing. So let's go back here and say, let's just copy this. Let's copy up to this point. Okay. Let's say basic salary is basic salary. Let's put this inside an str just to be safe. Just to be safe. Like, it turns it into a string. Okay. Okay, I think that does that. Then let's go back to print. We can now copy and paste. The key in your keyboard you use the most in your coding journey is copy and paste. Copy and paste. Very important key. Because a lot of the code you are going to write, you are going to research a lot of it. I don't know if somebody has asked a question. Let me check. Okay, what did I... Okay, yes. Okay. Please, what did you write inside the brackets? Gross pay equals sum. Okay, what I did was that question. What I did was I said gross pay equals sum of, I put all the variables. These things are all the variables I had initially declared. I declared basic salary, I declared transport allowance, I declared housing allowance, I declared other allowances. Hope it makes sense. Hope it makes sense. Depending on that question. It's sum, yes. So I want you to add it. Okay. Good. So let's say this now here is, let's say this is transport allowance. Let's call this housing allowance. Housing allowance. Then let's call this other allowances. Other allowance, let's just call it that. So now we are saying print name is first name, last name. Print basic salary is STR basic salary. Print transport allowance is STR transport. Let me allowance. Now you notice what I'm throwing inside here is simply the variables I had already declared. Please, if you do not understand at any point, do let me know. Do let me know, please, so that I can always go back and come forward. We have 1 hour 30 minutes today. Before the end of this class, I'll throw in another meeting link so that we can join for the next meeting. Housing, although it's available via video anyway. Housing allowance. So we now have other allowances. Okay, that makes sense. That makes logical sense. So now, what else did they say we should do? Then they now said you should print you are in the upper or lower class based on if condition. Okay, let's just copy this out. I don't think we want to do much here. So let's copy this out. Let's say then it will print another line. Then say print. I'm not introducing anything that we have not talked before. We have not talked about before. So let's paste this here. You are in the lower. This one should give us lower. Let's give it. This one should give us lower. You are in the lower salary category. Then that is hard coded anyway, but it will still work. Okay. Then let's also print out the gross pay. Let's copy this. Please, if you do not understand, do let me know, please. Please confirm that you can still see my screen. Can you still see my screen? Can you see what I'm doing? Can you see what I'm doing? Please confirm you can see what I'm doing. Okay, wonderful. Okay. Please, is every other person here? So that we can. Please type yes so that I can confirm we are all on the same page. Type yes so everybody here. Or is it hello? Okay, thank you, Kayode. Okay, thank you, Isaac. Okay, so basically let's move on. So you are in the upper or lower category. So let's remove this. Let's say we want to print. Let's put another F here. Your gross salary is, let's put this. It will take in one variable, which is this. Then let's call this str command V is this. Then let's put a full stop, then let's close our. Okay, so let me explain what I just did here. I've written a lot of junk. I call it junk. So basically what I did is simple. I said the user should input 6 values. The first 6 values are first name, last name, basic salary, transport allowance, housing allowance, and other allowance. Then I told the user to put an additional value, enter your comparison value, which you can put anything there. Then gross pay is sum of basic salary that we declared earlier, transport allowance we declared earlier, housing allowance we declared earlier, other allowances we declared earlier. Now we are not saying that if gross pay is less than comparison, you should print out all these things. Then we can just say else. Now if it is not, we simply say else. There are only 2 comparisons we are looking at for now. We'll still look at more complex comparison. Then you are in the upper. Okay, so you've seen that. So what we did is we are doing 2 comparisons. We are looking at, okay, is the gross pay less than the comparison value that we put in earlier? If it is less than, it will print out everything in that if command. But if it is greater than it will print out everything again, but it will tell you your category. Now let's try this code. Let's hope let's hope there's no error. Okay, print Which one did I make mistake? Expected indented block. Line 25. Print F. Sorry. Okay. Okay. If sorry, please. So this is showing me indentation error. How am I getting indentation? If gospel is less than comparison. Hold on, please. Somebody notice anything? Let me make it slide. Okay. If you are print supposed to be correct now. Oh. Sorry. This is the error. Sorry, I mistakenly copied print alongside. It's not the. Oh, I need cane. Sometimes some mistakes are just silly. Like this in this case now, what I did was. Oh, sorry. What I did was instead of copying from the first instead of copying everything except the if, I copied the if alongside, which made my code run into that error. It should work now. So first name, let's say Adedoku. Last name Agunbiade. Basic salary is, let's say, 25,000.54. Transport allowance is 34,000. Other allowances is, well, I printed other allowance twice, but it doesn't matter. Other allowances is 45, 89, whatever, 0.2324. Then other allowances should be like this. Let's just give it any value, 0.56. Then comparison value, let's say I want to compare to 100,000, 200,000. Yes, we have error. Some expects whose mic is on, please? Hello, guys. Hello. Somebody, whoever's.
Hello?
Please off your mic. That's the problem with running live coding sessions. You are bound to make mistakes. I've seen where the mistake came from. The sum is supposed to take two functions. It's supposed to be sum of A and B and all that, but it took 4. So that's where the issue came from. So let's use the opportunity to remove one of these other allowances. Then remove this other one. Please hope you know what these errors mean. Let me explain what this error is. Now it's simply saying type error. Comparison is equal to float. Type your comparison value. Now it's saying that type error here. Sum expects at most 2 arguments. Got 4. You notice in my sum function I put 4 arguments: basic salary, transfer allowance, housing allowance, and other allowance, when I was supposed to put just two variables there. So let's simply use our normal addition so that we can be fast and get this over with. Then let's do basic salary is 45,000. Annual transfer allowance is 30,000, just an assumption. Then this is 46,500.50. Then other allowances should be 56,000. Then your comparison value, let's say we are comparing to say 100,000. Now you see what is here? It's simply telling me that after imputing all these values into the system, what it's printing out is telling me that my name is Adedokun Agunbiade, which is the variable I assigned. Basic salary is 45,000. Council allowance is this. Housing allowance is this. Other allowances are this. Your gross salary is total. Then you are in the upper class when compared to the other to the value that I had imputed for comparison. Now let's put this in some kind of perspective. Now, over the next few weeks, what we are basically going to be doing, the only time we would ever call the print function like we used it is when we want to actually test our code. Maybe we want to test what will happen in the front end before we do something. So basically, the print function is just me. I see it as something that you use to test your code, kind of. Because normally, if people are going to be using your whatever you have built for real life, in terms of real life application, then they will need to how do I put it? They will need to have something like an interface. Let me give you an example. Now, let's look at something like this. I don't know if you can see my screen. Now, you can see something like this. Now, this is something I built. You notice there's an interface to this. Now, this is fully powered by Python. This whole thing is built on Python, totally on Python. This whole thing is built totally on Python. So what we are going to be learning is how to use Python to build things that are actually usable. You'll notice everything I've been building here so far. I will just write a piece of code and something shows an output. Then how do you show this to people? Maybe to show this to people that actually want to use it. And this is a very simple piece of code because we are just taking 6 variables, we are just adding them, then we are comparing them to one thing. Now, what if we wanted to build something more complex? Something like an actual payroll. For example, after getting gross pay, there are a lot of factors that still come into play, like consolidated relief allowance. You have things like pension premium. You have things like taxes that you have to calculate, and so on and so forth. Now, please confirm that this is understood so that I can move on. If it is not, please unmute and ask question, if you have any. Please unmute and ask questions if you have any question. Unmute and ask question if you have any question whatsoever.
Is the condition when you mention that if G is less than F, print the F that is inside the brackets. What is the F for?
Thank you. Good question. Now, remember that normally we used to print normal. We just print straight. We put a quotation mark, then type whatever we want to type inside the quotation mark. Now, we don't want to print straight. We want to impute values inside different places inside that print command. For example, now we want to print the name. We don't want it to be static. We don't want to just type name, then type the person's name actually, then type the person's last name. That means that even if this value for first name and last name changes, the print command will not change. We want to bring in the variable first name and bring in the variable last name into our print command. In the sense that, for example, if I had done this, you see it would have given me error. You notice it's putting everything as text. But the moment I put F, it changes it. The color becomes dark. The color for first name and last name becomes dark, meaning that curly brace is taking values from one of the variables we had declared earlier. Does it make any sense? Does it make any sense? Okay, Sean said, really different from what I did. What you did may not necessarily be wrong. Like I said, there is no right or wrong in coding. So long as we are getting output and we are doing it in an efficient way, there's no right or wrong. Normally, for the comparison value, I would have even preferred to put a static value, in the sense that I prefer to just say something like, instead of for this comparison value, instead of typing it every single time, I prefer to just say this is equal to 200,000 or 100,000 personally. Then put the value there. Since I have declared the value, which means wherever I'm using it on the code, it is going to be changing if I change it here. Does it make any sense? Sure, it does not mean you are wrong. The fact that you did it different from mine, it does not mean you are wrong. Adebisi said he did it exactly this way. And somebody even did it better than mine. The one I showed earlier. Isaac did his own. He added a lot of features because he is quite vast in coding already. So he added a lot of things, like he put them in a function. We've not gotten to the point of functions yet. We are almost there, but we are not there yet. So I would have put everything in function where it is returning a particular value. Then we use that value anywhere else on our code. You understand me? So let's move on. Let's move on so that we don't digress too much. So let's go back to. Let me close. Do I close this? No. Let me just leave it open. Let me just leave it open. Let's go back here. Where is that learning Python? Where's my projects? My project. I think it should be under my project. Okay, let's open our learning Python IPMB file. Now remember where we stopped the last time. Open. So it's still loading. I wonder why it's taking so long. Okay, we've actually done a lot of work. So let's rerun the entire thing. Okay, let's refresh. Restart so that all our variables will be recalled. So let's move down. Now the last time we met, we looked at loops. We said we looked at for loop. Now let's look at while loop. Now loops are two. We have two loops in Python. In other language we have about three. We have for, we have while, then we have switch. In Python we have only two. We have for and we have while. But there's a way we can use switch statement. I will also explain that. Now we have two kinds of loop in Python. We have for loop and we have the while loop. There are two different things. For loop is looping till it gets to the end of a value. While loop is looking at either true or false, if a value has been done or if it has not been done. Now the difference is that for loop is looking at a range of values. For example, I can say for I in 1 to 10 and say print every value in between. That is simple. That's what a for loop does. But for a while loop, I can say for while A is equal to true, continue to run that particular code. So long as A remains true, it will continue to run that code infinitely. But so the moment A becomes false, it stops running that particular code. So let's try something on while loop. Let's try something on while loop. Okay. Please, if you have any question, unmute yourself and just ask. But let's try and ask one at a time so that we don't get distracted totally. All right. So let's try while loop. Now, while loop is something about Python is that everything in Python is very, very easy to type, and it's more like speaking English. Let's say while, you see, to type a while loop, you simply say while A is less than 5. Less than 5. Let's simply say here A is equal to 0. Print I will run. Let's just put it like that. Now, there's a problem with this code. I'll tell you the problem. Now, unlike, for for loop, you always say the beginning of the loop and you always state the end of the loop. For example, you can say for x in 5, in range 1 to 5, or range 1 to 1 million, print this. You have already stated the beginning of the loop and you have stated the end of the loop, which means that at the end of that loop, it is going to stop that loop. It's going to stop doing whatever activity it is doing on that particular loop. But this while loop, there's an issue with it. The issue is that it is saying we have declared the value of A to be 0. We are saying that while A is less than 5, print I will run. We know very well that the value of A is static at 0, which means that this code will continue to run till thy kingdom come. Let's try it. Have you seen that? It is still running. It will run till it crashes. I pray it doesn't crash my laptop. Have you seen it? It will continue to run. Have you seen it? Keyboard interrupted. I was one that had to interrupt before it stopped running. It kept running. It kept running, kept running, kept running. The reason why it did that is that at every point in time, the value, at every point in time in this code, in this particular line of code, the value of A is 0 and it is always less than 5. Now, the question is, how do we solve this problem? There's a simple answer to it. Now, let's say that every time this code runs, let us also do something for us. Let us also say A is equal to A plus equal to 1. Or let's use the simpler one. A equals to A plus 1. Now, let me tell you what this does. Now, it's simply saying that, okay, we have declared the value of A as 0. Now, so long as A is less than 5, continue to print I will run. But the moment A hits 5, stop printing I will run. Now, we've added a new line to our while loop. We are saying that every time this thing runs, add 1 to the value of A. Add 1 to the value of A. So let's do this. Let's run it. You'll notice here, it has run 5 times. Because the first value of A is 0, it will run once. The next value of A is 1, it will run again. The next value of A is 2, it will run again. The next value of A is 3, it will run again. That's 4 times. The next value of A is 4, it will run again. That's 5 times. That's why this code has run 5 times. You see the difference between for loop and while loop. Now, the for loop will set the beginning of the loop, will set the end of the loop. We can even say for A in so and so list, which means it has a beginning and it has an end. But for while loop, it's different. We are saying, okay, the value of A presently is this. We want you to continue to print the value, this particular thing, so long as the value of A remains less than a particular value that we have declared. In this case, the value we have declared is 5. And we want the print function to run every time that, so long as A is less than 5. Now, what we did to make it not to run infinitely is that we are saying that every time you run this particular line of code, the print, do another line of code. Add 1 to the value of A. Sometimes we may need to add 2. Sometimes we may need to add 5. Sometimes we may need to add an arbitrary figure that we have assigned to a variable somewhere. So it's not like it's something that is written in stone. It's something that it's something that when you think around it, when you think about a problem, you have to think about, okay, should I input the value directly, or should I take a step back and assign it to a variable, then use it in my function? So we understand that for loop is naturally limited because you say for A in list this, but while loop, while A is less than 5, print this. Sometimes you can say while A is true. Let me give another example. Let's try an interesting line of code. Let's say A, let's declare A again, is equal to int input enter any integer. Are you seeing that? Enter any integer. So we have said you should put any integer here. Now let's say how do I go about this? I want to assign. Oh, sorry. Okay. Input enter any integer. Let's say we're almost done with this session. Okay. So what we're going to do? This 3 minutes. Let me quickly create another meeting. We are going to end this meeting at this point. We will resume back around 8:05. Are we all in agreement? To resume back around 8:05 so that we can complete this. We'll resume back around 8:05. So let me. So the video will be in 2 parts. This first part and the second part. Okay, so we are resuming back around 8:05. You get a new meeting link in the group that you can join for the second session. All right, thank you all. I will see you back in 8:05.